Howdy, Iron Horse fans. Welcome to the Iron Horse Roundup. In this episode, we are going to talk about my favorite diesels of the 20th century. A series of diesels known as F units, like shown here, and their longer counterparts known as E units. These iconic streamlined diesels were the workhorses from the 1940s and 50s all the way up to the 1970s when they were retired. For the most part, that is. Some went as far as the 90s in commuter service. Let's talk about the history of these diesel-powered iron horses. Now, I'm not going to go over all the examples of the designations, but let me just give you an example of a designation for an F unit. One of the most successful being an F7. F stands for freight, because they were popular as freight units, although they could also haul passenger trains. Although F originally stood for 14, as in 1400 horsepower, and for some reason, 7 was applied to the fourth generation of these diesels, meaning there were no F4s, F5s, or F6s. For E units, the E stood for 1800 horsepower. These were primarily popular on passenger trains. In the late 1930s, steam power still dominated the rails. However, EMC, which later would be known as EMD of General Motors, would develop a type of locomotive that would revolutionize rail transportation in the United States and Canada in the coming decades. In 1939, they introduced the FT freight diesel, the diesel that would see the demise of steam engines. Now, yes, I know that sounds ironic that I love these units because, as you may know, I am a big fan of steam engines. Like a huge fan. I love steam engines. They will always be my favorite. However, as time went on, railroads were starting to compete with other forms of transportation following World War II, such as highways and airlines. And to keep up, railroads needed to modernize, as steam engines were seen as old and expensive to maintain. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, F units, E units, and many other early diesels were seen working alongside steam engines in a time known as the Transition Era. World War II delayed the conversion to diesel because the Navy was given priority for diesel engines, which limited the use on railways, although some diesel engines were still produced for the railways. After the war, the stage was set. Dieselization was coming to the railroads. Steam engines managed to hold out for yet another decade and a half after the war, but by the end of the 1950s, most steam engines had been retired from the railroads of America, ushering in this new chapter of diesels. The new diesels were easier and cheaper to maintain and keep clean and required fewer workers. They also came in many colors. One of the most iconic shown here is the Santa Fe War Bonnet, which was seen pulling trains like the Super Chief and El Capitan of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. Sadly, my experience with these streamlined units is extremely limited. The only of which I've gotten so far in real life is Union Pacific 942 and E8 at the Southern California Railway Museum. However, I will start showing a bunch of model versions of these units that I have seen at train shows and garden railways and other places over the years. This G-scale F unit here is shown wearing Southern Pacific Black Widow colors, which was primarily used on Southern Pacific freight trains back in the day.
Get a Markland and not have to worry about it.
Or you can do boxes.
That's a Dixie Cup filled with concrete, yeah. Ornaments, yeah.
Alrighty, we'll see you guys.
Now, as you just heard on this Northern Pacific North Coast Limited train, the air horns back then sounded a little bit different than what we know today, sounding more similar to truck horns at the time. Many F units, such as seen on this N-scale Milwaukee Road passenger train, had what's called a B unit, which was basically a cabless engine to help out the main locomotive. Kind of like the tender on a steam locomotive in a sense. Except it provides extra power, not so much fuel. For example, this Baltimore and Ohio F unit here is seen pulling a B unit. Another famous Southern Pacific livery seen on F and E units of the Southern Pacific was the classic daylight scheme. As you just heard, many F and E units also had more familiar sounding diesel horns. While a Union Pacific gas turbine train and a Southern Pacific daylight take a rest in the yard here, a Pennsylvania train led by a pair of E units passes through. Shown here is a Canadian National passenger train led by an F unit and a B unit. This Baltimore and Ohio E unit is leading a train of planetary proportions, as you can see.
See, here's how you got to see the styrofoam, and you cover it, spray it.
The new one, the passenger cars don't have any wheels. So it's the junction in between that has a pair of wheels.
It's like so much fun to play with.
Not gonna lie, Union Pacific Armor Yellow looks excellent on these streamlined units. Here comes a Burlington passenger train. About to enter the scene here is a Chicago and Northwestern-based commuter train, led by an E unit. These were among the units to last into the early 90s.
Let me look at the map. Do you know what a map is? You don't know what a map is? You want to see? I'll show you one. Oh, okay, that's
Two half tracks, one M16A half track.
when we get home, we can play that one, okay? We can't do that one.
This scene here is very reminiscent of the New Mexico desert where the Super Chief once ran through, as like shown here. Shown here is a Denver and Rio Grande passenger train. Personally, my favorite Santa Fe livery is the blue bonnet shown here. Both of these E units are gorgeous, but I especially love the Rock Island one that's coming into view. Believe it or not, even Amtrak had both F and E units. Coming into view here is an E unit with the Day 1 paint scheme pulling a consist of Superliner cars. From the looks of it, we've got Santa Fe Blue Bonnet F units out now. Awesome. Today, many locomotives carry on a name starting with the letter F, such as the F40 shown here. The F59 common on some commuter railroads, and more recently, the F125 used solely by Metrolink. However, my favorite F units, and their longer counterparts, the E units of the early days, will always be my favorite. The bulldog-shaped nose, the multiple liveries, you just can't beat that when it comes to classic diesels. That does it for this episode of the Iron Horse Roundup. I will see you soon on another railroading adventure, and I'll see you out on the high iron.